There's a famous wave in Tahiti called the Millennium Wave that was in 2000. That was an emotional moment for me because it was something that I had envisioned I would be able to do and just didn't know if it represented the impossible.
All right, you're listening to Hawke Talk. I'm here today with Laird Hamilton. How you doing?
I like it. I like Hawke Talk. Yeah, my dad used to catch baby hawks when he was a kid, so I love hawks. I love birds of prey in general. They would climb up the trees and get the babies and then raise them.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
And hope the mom didn't come back.
Yeah, that's a worthwhile hope. I want to dive into that more. But yeah, to start out, I assume like the day you're born, I guess the first wave you caught is your mom's water breaking, and from then you were just surfing from birth. Is that fair, or did it just kick off from the beginning in the hospital?
Well, there's a little bit of a crazy story actually. Before I was born, my mom was doing and I don't know all the details, but they were doing a experiment at the University of San Francisco where it was called a bathysphere, but they would put like a reverse hairdryer on my mom's stomach, and pull on the abdominal wall. That would let the fetus move more freely inside of the, like those old ladies' hair dryers. Yeah. It was giant one of those that went over the stomach, but it was a vacuum, and it would expand and give in the last trimester. It would just give the fetus more room to move. I don't know if that had any long-term effects, but they said it was supposed to, it had some benefits, but it was too hard to implement because so many kids are being born.
Yeah. Fair. Well, and where are you originally from? Let's start there.
I was born in San Francisco.
Okay.
And my mom was a single parent, and she took me to Hawaii when I was just an infant. And so she moved to Hawaii. All of her friends, she grew up in Southern California. All of her friends were surfers. Uh-huh. And she kind of grew up in the Gidget era. Her actual friend was Gidget and Linda Benson, and so Hawaii was like that was the surfing paradise, especially in the 60s, 64, a lot of turmoil in the country. I think it was like, let's escape. And she moved me to Hawaii as a child, and then very quickly to what I would describe as probably some of the most dangerous beaches in the world.
Really? And was she surfing those beaches? Why did you end up there?
Well, she surfed when she was young, but it was more, I think it was more of follow the surfers. All the surfers were going to these beaches. There was a couple of beaches, one in particular called the Bonsai Pipeline. And that was like the most dangerous beach in the world. And surfers came from all over. And I think her friends were surf movie makers. She might have had a boyfriend that was a surfer as well, that kind of was going there. So she was drawn there, and then that's where that's where she met my stepdad as well. But we kind of, I as a little kid, I lived at what I would describe as probably one of the more dangerous beaches to grow up at, and then all the surfers from all over came there to kind of test their skills, and I was surrounded by that environment to start right from the get-go.
So when was the first time you either paddled out? Like, when did you end up in the surf? How old were you?
Well, they pushed me on. The rumors are, because I don't have great recollection at 2 or 3 years old, but at 2 or 3 years old, they were pushing me onto waves. My mom said I could kind of swim before I could walk, that I kind of I could crawl to the pool and then I'd go in the water when I was a little kid. I don't know how well I was swimming. I think I was probably floating or something, but yeah, it's very, very early getting pushed on waves as a child. My first a board that was made, when I was a kid, there was really no boards for kids, and there was no boogie boards. So I was kind of gifted broken pieces of surfboards. So I would ride broken pieces of boards. And then eventually a board was made for me when I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. I had a board that was actually built for me.
Huh.
And that was my kind of my first board. I don't think it was that good of a board, but it looked nice.
Awesome. And so, what kind of work did your mom do while you were growing up? And when did she meet your stepdad? What? How are you?
Well, my mom, well, she married my stepdad when I was probably five, I think,
Okay.
five or, and met him a little before that. I actually, it's said that I introduced him
Hmm.
to her, or that maybe he just thought he saw me playing at the beach and took me home. I needed a dad. You know, they describe it like I needed a dad, and I saw somebody who looked like would be a good dad, and so I brought him home. I think he already knew my mom was cute, and so he probably was like, "Oh, I'll take you home, Laird."
Yeah.
Um, so, but yeah, when I was about five, he married my mom.
And what kind of work did they both do? Like, what were you growing like
Not
professionally?
not 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 very much. I mean, initially, my mom, before she was married, was on welfare. She didn't really like that. My mom worked when she was pregnant up in like at a fairground in San Francisco because she was a single mom. Eventually, she worked in restaurants and and my mom didn't want to be on welfare,
Hmm.
and so she and didn't have anybody providing for her. So she eventually, as she went, she ended up, eventually building a helicopter business,
Huh.
and started the first helicopter business in Hawaii, and
Like the
was,
helicopter tour, she was one of the first.
yeah,
The
yeah.
first.
Her and a ex like Vietnam pilot
Wow.
uh, collaborated and started taking people on tours
Yeah.
of the island, and started the first kind of way, because the island that we were living on was inaccessible in the middle, and so she started that, and ended up kind of building that up and making a big business out of that, and having a successful life. But when I was a little kid, she worked at a restaurant,
Hmm.
and did whatever she could to try to provide for us.
And how quick did you become like? I'm gonna use the word maybe obsessed, or at least super. Like you were very into surfing. Like how quickly you obviously surfed from before you can remember, but when did it start to transition to being like that's all you wanted to do?
I think pretty quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
I think when I was like, I mean, I was in the water every day, all day long. We
Yeah.
lived at the beach
Yeah.
in Hawaii. It's all about the ocean. So as a little kid, I mean, I was, I think, an obnoxious youth. I was said to have, um, told, people I'm going to be the best, blah, blah, blah. Like what little kids do when they're
Yeah.
probably scared, what you do when you're scared. But my obsession for the water, again, started from a little kid, and then surfing. I mean, I used to ditch school and go surfing. I mean, I surfed. I surfed, growing up every day, all day long, as long as I could, and whenever there were waves. So I kind of was on the mission. I think later on it changed, and I went into some other areas in sports, but surfing was always my foundation from the very, and just being in the ocean, swimming and body surfing, anything to be in the ocean.
Got it. And so, at what point did you actually start to achieve like, oh, I am good at this? Like, you obviously had the bravado of a young kid, but when was it that you started competing or seeing that you were better than people around you, that kind of thing?
I mean, my first kind of, I think my initial notoriety was, I think I had some pictures in Surfing Magazine, and that was a big thing because, when I was whatever, 15, 14, I had some little parts in little movies that were surf movies that I was a little kid doing stuff. So I already had some exposure, but, being considered somebody who was, you don't really, until you hit until you hit puberty and you become a little courageous. It starts to happen. Then, you start being able at 13 and 14, you start being able to compete kind of, and I'm not in a competition, but the lineup, surfing is
Mhm.
competitive in the ocean. For waves, it's just in it, especially in Hawaii. So, you start competing with men when you're 14 and 15 years old,
Mhm.
13, 14, 15, you start to, you become a little man, and you start to compete against other men, and you start to have an idea of your skill versus their skill, just because the waves kind of will show that, if it's big, if it's you're courageous, all those things.
Yep. And so how did you think about it, like career wise, as you became a teenager, as you became an adult? Were you like, this is what I'm going to do and nothing else, or did you have like aspirations to go study college or to go get a certain career? Or was it like, I'm surfing through and through and just started out that way?
Much to my mother's chagrin. I mean, my mother was disappointed that my schooling was kind of a debacle, just in general. I ended up finally, my mother signed me out of school when I was in 11th grade, and I went to work.
Mhm.
And poured cement, and I did pretty much anything I could. We grew up kind of working, being exposed to farming and fishing and cutting trees, and just the environment. We kind of were in the jungle, so you're always doing work, of some kind, whether it's just maintaining stuff or working and trying to make some money so you could buy stuff. So I always subsidized my surfing. I wasn't really, I mean, I had aspirations to make a living from surfing. I didn't know how I was going to do it per se, because I didn't want to follow this kind of the structure of surfing competitively and being in contest.
Yep.
That I watched my dad do that. I was like, that's not something that I want to. I don't want to subject my surfing. I looked at my surfing more like, kind of an expression, a little more self, like art. I looked at it more like art or music. It
Yep.
was just like self-expression, and then, but how do you turn that into money? How do you earn a living doing that? That's a tricky thing. I got sponsored, early on, um, pretty, pretty lightly, not a huge sponsorship.
Yep.
I had multiple kind of
Who was your
clothing
first sponsor?
sponsored. I want to say, it might have been Sunbreaker, a company called Sunbreaker, and then there was another one called Maui and Sons that sponsored me,
Mhm.
for surfing, they were sponsoring me because I was I call it a free surfer, but I would just, go out and surf when the surf was good, and either get photographs that were in the magazines or be put in a movie or something like that. And
Yeah.
that was exposure for the brand, and then that kind of led to, eventually, I mean, some of my first real kind of substantial sponsorships came from windsurfing, actually.
Oh.
I learned how to windsurf, and then right when it kind of, after it had kind of been out for a little while, and then ended up, being sponsored by a company, and I went to Europe and broke like a speed sailing record, and so I had that kind of, I got some sponsorship through that, and then eventually, I got together with a French company, called Oxbow,
Mhm.
and it was a French apparel company that was multi-sported apparel company. And so they sponsored me, and I ended up being in a relationship with them for almost to about 22 or 23 years.
Wow.
And
That's great.
they kind of took advantage of all the things I was doing. They were interested in kind of my approach to the ocean, and I did snowboard stuff for them. I windsurfed and kite surfed, and just everything I was doing and all the innovative stuff I was involved in,
Yep.
they could capitalize on it. They were able to use it for their brand and capitalize. And so that gave me a real good foundation, but in the interim, and even within that, along the way, I was always having to subsidize myself, through, I always say I would have drove an excavator to subsidize my surfing, but I was able to get sponsored and really focused on, on, it gave me the freedom, that support
Yep.
gave me the freedom to put the energy and the time, and not have to work,
Yep.
full time and then try to surf.
How old were you when that kicked in, that you could go full time surfing and didn't have to work side jobs?
I mean, I always had to work side job, and I have a lot of energy, so I'm
Yeah.
always doing other stuff. But I'd say, in my early 20s,
Yeah.
maybe like mid 20s, it started to happen. It took a little while. I think by the time, and it started small, and then I worked my way up into making it more valuable as I went. It started to become, and I would always do other works if there was a film or commercial stuff, or whenever I could. I subsidized some of my early career with some modeling, that some photographer was in Hawaii shooting for Men's Italian Vogue, and they saw some surfing pictures that Walter Yost from Sports Illustrated was shooting of me surfing, and they said, "Oh, I want to see this guy." And then I ended up doing some modeling for that, and then ended up getting some other modeling work, and then I got some other film work. So I was all over the place. Still kind of all over the place. I always say just a jack of all trades, master of none. Just
Yeah.
able to do what I need to do.
Yeah. And that's fair. And so what were there any points during those early years when you were, as you said, you have a lot of energy, but you really just want to surf, you're working construction, doing these other things. Was it ever did you always have confidence you were going to get through that, and or was it never really like worried about the future? You're like, this works, this is sustainable. Like I guess was there any point you were kind of burning out?
Well, I think I always, I felt like the, I knew the destination. I just didn't know the route. I
Sure.
just intuitively sensed that I was going to be able to do some special things, but I just didn't know what that road looked like. And it was, at many times it was it was there, it was confusing, and as far as like doing something that seemed to not really have anything to do with what my ultimate goal was, and somehow that actually being beneficial. And so I'd like to say, it was a plan. It wasn't my plan. I had maybe an intuition on the plan or the destination of it, but it was like a lot of the things that happened, you know didn't completely, it wasn't so like calculated, like, well, I'm going to windsurf and that's going to teach me how to do
Yeah.
these things that are going to end up helping me ride the biggest waves in the world, and like all that kind of stuff. Those things didn't connect.
But you had
But
a level
i
of faith that it was coming.
I did. Yeah, I did. Something was coming. I just
Yeah.
felt, I felt that I always say that you don't arrive at a destination that you first didn't start out to get to.
Fair. And so on that note, when did you feel you arrived? Like, was it when you started, you got the Oxbow partnership, or like, when was it that you were like, oh, I made it. Like I did what I set out to do.
I haven't.
I love that. Good answer.
I haven't. I
Nice.
haven't. I haven't. Yeah. I mean, I've gotten to do some amazing things,
Yeah.
there's no doubt, but I haven't arrived. I mean, this is a thing, this is an elusive thing that I'm pursuing that I don't know if I don't think there is an end. I
Yeah.
don't think there is no end. The end is the end. The
Yeah.
end is when they close, they put the dirt on the box,
Yeah. I feel the same way. They're like the moment you like there was I saw some great poster or something recently that was like, just remember what was it? It was remember when what you have today was your goals. And I was like, that's a good one, because I'm similar to you where it's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? The next thing the next achievement I want, etc. But it is good to have the reminder too of like, oh yeah, if I told myself 20 years ago, this is where I'd be sitting, like amazing. So, and so,
I have an interesting quote, a
yeah,
stuntman quote that you'll appreciate, which is that never let your memories be bigger than your dreams.
amen. I love that. That's great. And so on that same note, in terms of memories, what was the first time because you've had some incredible achievements as far as surfing, you've surfed some of the biggest waves in the world, etc. When was the first, or did you ever feel like when you hit one of those, was there ever a moment of like, holy shit, I can't believe this just happened, or that I'm here? Like, was there
Well,
that?
there's a famous wave in Tahiti called the Millennium Wave that was in 2000, and that, I mean, that was an emotional moment for me, because it was something that I had envisioned I would be able to do, and just didn't know if it was because it represented the impossible. Like,
Mhm.
it all of a sudden it represented that that the impossible is possible. Like, until that moment, that it was an impossible thing, and then I was able to, through the technique of that we developed to ride giant waves. I was able to ride a wave that up until that point it was is a completely, it's an unrideable wave. It would be like a death sentence. So it was, and so that was and that had that had a big impact in the surf world. That went around the world like a shock wave, just because it represented this kind of, it represented this broken barrier. It's like breaking the sound barrier. Yeah. And I think so that was one of the I mean, I've had a bunch of different ones, but that was a unique. I mean, I've had other more traumatic ones that weren't so. It was more like I survived. So I've been rescued at sea, and I've been, I've had a couple near death experience stuff. Enough of them so that those are some ones that you remember too. But that wave was a that was a successful successful moment.
And what was it that, what do you think it is about you that makes you want to break that barrier? Like, most people don't. Most people are not born to want to, go take those kind of risks and put in that kind of work. Like, why do you think you innately wanted to do that?
I think it's something to do with, I mean, my stepdad, who I, take a lot of wisdom from over the years, he would say big wave riders are born and not made, and you can take 1,000 people and there's just always some one or a couple of them maybe that have a tendency. I think it's part of the human species that we just have to, there's a few people, and I'm not saying I'm one of them. I'm just saying that you're always going to have a couple of these. You need this kind of thinking, this kind of thing to kind of, push to another thing so we can continue to go forward. I think something you're born with. I think you don't always get the fortune to be able to deal with it. Sometimes it's a thing that, you don't last long either. There's old and bold, no old bold. So I think there's some of that. I think it's a lot of it had to do with my upbringing. It probably had to do with, maybe not having a dad and being raised in, in a certain level of, economic, I hate to say poverty and poor me, and because there's none of that, but just, not having, having an outhouse and a bare tin roof growing up, and and being different than being a kind of an outcast in an environment. I think there's so many factors that feed into that nucleus. I think maybe there's some, you have the foundation for it. You have the mechanism, and then all the, then the pieces line up to bring out the and you survive it, and all those things come together. But I think, I mean, I do believe that there's, I do believe in kind of predestined stuff. Like, I believe that there's some things to do with that that you, like, one of the things I feel like one of the reasons why I was put here on Earth was to ride waves and, do the things I've done. I do believe that. I don't think I don't think it's just because I'm, that I'm so special, or I'm so smart, or something, or so calculated, or something like that. I think some of it's just out of your hands. I think that I mean, for me, I feel like that's the only way to be honest, is to believe that, it's.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so what was it about, what did you change, or what did you do that allowed you to ride that wave? Like, what did you said you guys invented new ways to do it? Was it the jet ski towing?
Well, yeah, being towed in, that realizing that to be towed onto a giant wave. Also riding the board I was riding with foot straps. I had a board with foot straps. I had, which I kind of adopted from windsurfing. But being towed onto a wave, that was a big. My friend Derek Donor and Buzzy Kerbox and I developed that technique, kind of, to be able to get pulled onto giant waves, and that changed. I mean, that makes that giant wave in Portugal more rideable. That makes these unrideable waves right. It just makes everything on that's all these biggest waves in the world that are being ridden with that technique. And so that really, and that was a validation of the technique, because the technique until that point had been kind of, I'd say, kind of disrespected, or not appreciated, or it wasn't validated. It wasn't validated. That just validated. We had been validating it, but it had not been accepted by the by the, the world, let's say. Personally, that wave, the fact that it was accepted by the world, that had nothing to do with my response to what happened, because though understand waves, I've been in waves my whole life. I know what a wave is and what kind of wave that wave was, and that's just a wave that you would never ever be able to be on, and even be and barely be near unless you were, about ready to drown. And so that was, for me, it had so much meaning to me, and then after that it had meaning to the other, the industry. That was, again, part of it was, that was like the validation of it. I knew what it meant to me, and and then I saw what it meant. But the technique of being towed on, it was definitely something so simple, but yet it's the impact is profound.
And so you did that 25 years ago. What turned into like your next mountain? I mean, that was so much impact. What was like, sounds like you're someone that wants to raise the bar. As you said, your dreams are bigger than your memories. So how did you kind of progress up from there? What felt like the next achievement?
Well, the next thing is foiling. So
Okay.
foiling becomes the next real thrust. I had an incident on what we considered the biggest, kind of some of the biggest surf that we have ever ridden, and we found out that the equipment didn't, our normal conventional board didn't work. There's a story of the day, in the book The Wave by Susan Casey. There's a chapter on that day, but it was a day that a friend of mine was severely hurt, and there was a rescue, and I found out that my equipment, the only way to ride the biggest waves in the world was going to be with hydrofoils, which is something that we had been playing with, and kind of were the first people to take into surf and use it and be able to ride waves with it. We understood you could ride waves with the hydrofoils, and so, and then now if you look at, like, hydrofoiling is an industry now. I mean, you have all the disciplines of hydrofoiling. You have, I mean, it's on all of the America's Cup stuff, but it's, we have e-foiling, which is electric. We have
Yep.
wing foiling. We have kiting. We have all these different disciplines. So foiling is the thrust for me. I once that day happened, my focus on trying to be towed into a giant wave on a surfboard completely changed, because I had I got to a barrier. There was a barrier, which was that at a certain point that a conventional surfboard will not be able to descend down a 150-foot wave. It won't. It's just it's impossible, given the friction and the mathematics. And so that totally turned my head towards foiling, and I focused on that and have been in pursuit of that. In the last few years, on my 60th birthday, I was hoping something monumental would happen. Ride a 60-foot wave, but I've ridden bigger waves at 60 foot, so that wouldn't have been anything monumental. But I ended up able to ride the longest wave of my life, which so far it's the longest wave that I know of anybody really riding a single swell. I rode for 10 minutes. I was able to ride for 10 minutes on a single wave.
Where is this?
And well, if I told you, I'd have to, no.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, it was in San Francisco, which ended up, I call it, that's why I call it the Alchemist. You're born, you travel around the whole world only to come back to San Francisco to have a monumental thing. So but anyway, I had that 10-minute ride, and that was a monumental thing. I have some, I have these things I'm pursuing and in pursuit of in the area. But again, it seems like as you go towards these goals, or these, I think of it as like, I feel like you're given the opportunity, you see something, you envision something that you could potentially do. And then in the pursuit of that, as long as you stay open and don't get too caught up in the thing, you continue to get other ones. It continues to expand. So I think that's a big part of it. I think is once if I was content with just getting towed in on a surfboard, I would have never got into foiling. I would have never led into a thing. I would have never kept, and so on. And so just, it's like if I never windsurfed, it wouldn't have led me to all the things that led me to be able to get into towing that help you. It's like all these things, and so I think that I try to continue to contain to be open to the signal, I call it, to the
Yep.
message, and not close up and be content with, okay, I'm good, I did this, or this is what I do, or this is how I do it, and just be open to like what are the new and interesting um, things. And I think another thing that led me to all of this stuff is just that curiosity, and then not accepting that just because that's the way they do it, that's the only way to do it.
Yeah. Love that. And so, got two more questions for you. Number one, what's next?
Well, I'm looking at the ocean. The ocean is big, and there's a lot of things to be done in it. And I'm being led. I think I'm being led out into the ocean. Into more remote places. I
Mm.
said it a long time ago. I've said it more than once. I go, as we go, just the nature of the ocean being more crowded, there are more people doing stuff. We're going to be driven into more and more fierce places just because that's where the energy is.
Mm.
And so I feel like I'm being led in those directions, and I have some ideas, but I'm just kind of I'm pursuing um, kind of where the ocean leads. And I really I'm really interested in doing things I haven't done. I think that for me, I feel like, once I've done it, or a few times, or done it long enough, I'm interested in doing things I haven't done. And there's a lot of those.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, last question for someone else that wants to, reach the pinnacle of their vocation, their interest, their whatever it is. What's one piece of advice you either did get or wish you got that like helped you keep going like this?
Well, I think I mean, I might have had it, but I think you just have to be. Gabby calls it the terrier. You have to be like a dog in with the thing where you just are relentless in your pursuit. You just and I mean, I've had a lot of injuries and other things that would have deterred me. I might have tried not to beat myself up so much. I mean, because if you're doing something physical, um, but I think the relentless pursuit. I just think that there has to be, you have to love it. And if you don't love it, like if you don't love what you're doing, it's going to be very hard to be relentless.
Yep.
It's just going to be difficult. So you either need to find something you love or figure out how to love it. But I would say just be relentless in your pursuit.
Amen. Well, Laird, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on Hawke Talk.
I look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely.